Readers are welcome to leave comments in the comments section.
The rain didn't just fall in Chicago, it interrogated the city. It beat against the windows of The Velvet Note, with a rhythmic, insistent thrum that seemed to demand an answer. Inside, the air tasted of cedar, expensive bourbon, and the low-frequency hum of a double bass. Elena sat at the corner of the mahogany bar, the sharp edge of the wood pressing against her forearm, a grounding sensation she leaned into. She adjusted her watch. It was 11:47 p.m. She was 3 minutes behind her self-imposed curfew, a crack in the armor of her routine that annoyed her more than it should have. Her martini was untouched, the olive floating like a lonely planet in a glass of clear, chilled gin. She watched the condensation slide down the glass, a single, deliberate track, mirroring the way she kept her focus pinned to the stage. She didn't look at people. Looking at people led to conversations. Conversations led to expectations. And tonight, Elena had exactly zero capacity for the performance of social niceties. Then, the door swung open, dragging the chaotic energy of the storm inside with it. A woman stumbled in, shaking a saturated trench coat with the frantic energy of a wet bird. She was a riot of color in a room defined by muted tones, a yellow scarf, a bag overflowing with charcoal pencils, and eyes that seemed to take in the entire room in a single, sweeping motion. She didn't check her coat. She didn't look for a table. She marched straight to the bar, her boots leaving damp, darkened prints on the polished floorboards. She chose the stool next to Elena. Elena shifting her weight just enough to create a physical boundary, a micro-gesture of do not cross. "It's a massacre out there," the newcomer said, her voice dropping into the jazz, a warm, husky contralto that seemed to vibrate in the empty space between them. Elena didn't turn her head. She kept her eyes on the saxophonist. The weather report was quite specific about the forecast, actually. "Oh, I read the report," the woman replied, peeling off her coat to reveal a sweater that had seen better days, pulled over a silk camisole. She tapped her sketchbook against the bar. "I just chose to believe I could outrun it. I was wrong. Gravity and velocity, right?" "Stubbornness," Elena corrected, finally glancing over. The woman was disheveled, her hair clinging to her temples in damp, dark strands, but her gaze was sharp. It was the look of someone who dismantled things to see how they worked. She was striking, not in a way that fit magazines, but in a way that commanded gravity. "Maya," the woman said, extending a hand. Her fingers were stained with graphite. "Elena." She didn't take the hand. She looked at the stains, then back to the stage. Maya didn't pull her hand back. She let it hang there, suspended in the space between them, an open invitation that was as rude as it was charming. "Nice to meet you, Elena," who doesn't like to shake hands. "I like hygiene," Elena said, her voice dry. "I like honesty," Maya countered, retracting her hand to trace the rim of her own glass, which the bartender had promptly placed before her. "And I like that you're sitting here in the darkest corner of the bar, trying very hard to be invisible, while wearing a dress that costs more than my rent." Elena stiffened. It was a fair assessment, and that made it irritating. "I enjoy the anonymity. It is a rare luxury." "Is it a luxury?" Maya asked, turning to face her fully now. The movement caused her shoulder to brush Elena's. It was slight, a fleeting contact of fabric, but it sent a jolt of awareness down Elena's spine that felt like static electricity. Maya didn't pull away. She leaned into the proximity, her dark eyes searching Elena's. "Or is it a cage? You look like you're waiting for something," but you're terrified of what might happen if it actually shows up. Elena felt her pulse skip, a betrayal of her physiological control. She took a slow, calculated sip of her drink, the cold bite of the gin steadying her. You make grand assumptions for someone who hasn't even dried off yet. I'm an artist, Maya said, lifting her glass in a mock toast. We deal in assumptions. We see the lines before the sketch is even on the paper. And right now, I see someone who is holding their breath. And you? Elena asked, turning her body slightly, finally dropping the pretense of disinterest. What are you holding? Everything, Maya whispered. The space between them suddenly felt charged, the atmosphere shifting from the ambient noise of a jazz club to something intimate, hermetic. Elena could smell the rain on Maya's skin, a clean, sharp scent that cut through the perfume of the bar. It was intoxicating. It was dangerous. Maya reached out, her fingers hovering near the edge of Elena's sleeve. She didn't touch her, but she moved with a deliberation that was entirely focused. You have a smudge of ink on your wrist. Elena looked down. A tiny dot of black, likely from a pen she'd used earlier. She went to wipe it off, but Maya's hand moved faster, her thumb brushing against the inner skin of Elena's wrist. The contact was electric. Elena's breath hitched in her throat, a sharp, audible sound that seemed deafening in the silence that descended between them. Maya didn't pull her hand away. Her thumb traced a slow, languid circle against Elena's pulse point, steady and heavy, as if she were measuring the rhythm of Elena's heart. You're fast, Elena breathed, her voice losing its edge, melting into something softer, vulnerable. You're just slow, Maya countered, a playful, yet intense glint in her eyes. You've been building walls so high you forgot that doors exist. Maybe I like the walls. Do you? Maya let her hand drop, but the warmth remained, a phantom sensation on Elena's skin. Because you haven't looked at the stage in 5 minutes. You've been looking at me. Elena didn't deny it. To deny it would be a lie, and for some reason, lying to this woman felt like an impossibility. She felt a magnetic pull, an invisible tether that was drawing her out of her orbit, dragging her toward this chaos. She wanted to push Maya away, to return to the safety of her drink and her routine. But she also wanted to see what would happen if she let the tether snap. What is your name again? Elena asked, stalling. Maya, she repeated, her smile softening, losing its sharp edges. And yours is Elena. The girl who wants to be invisible but is burning far too bright to be ignored. That was incredibly pretentious, Elena noted, though the corners of her mouth twitched. But was it wrong? Elena looked at her. Really looked at her. She saw the graphite on her fingers, the wild hair, the way she sat with a complete disregard for the polite decorum of the space. She saw the challenge in Maya's posture, the way she was inviting Elena to break her own rules. I have a car waiting, Elena said, her voice low. It wasn't a dismissal, but a statement of fact. A barrier she was trying to maintain. I didn't ask for a ride, Maya said. She finished her drink, the ice clinking against the glass. She turned to face Elena, leaning her chin on her hand. But I wouldn't say no to another drink. One more. Before the rain decides to swallow the city whole. Elena looked at the clock. 12:15 a.m. She was officially late. Her schedule was ruined. The structure she clung to was eroding with every second Maya sat beside her. She should have left. She should have paid her tab, tipped the bartender, and vanished into the night. Instead, Elena signaled the bartender. Same again, Elena said, her voice steady. Maya's smile widened, a slow, triumphant thing that made Elena feel as though she had just handed over the keys to a kingdom she hadn't realized she was guarding. I'm going to ruin you, Elena, Maya murmured, the ambiguity of the statement hanging in the air, thick and sweet as honey. You can try, Elena whispered back, her gaze locked with Maya's, the neon lights from the window reflecting in their eyes like captured stars. The music on stage shifted, a slower, bluesy saxophone solo that seemed to wrap around the two of them, isolating them in their own private bubble. They were strangers, two polarities of a magnet, and the force between them was becoming gravitational. Elena watched Maya pick up her pencil, her fingers moving with a fluid grace as she began to sketch on a napkin. She didn't look up, but her presence was a physical weight beside Elena. Elena found herself leaning in, curious, drawn to the movement of the graphite, the way Maya's brow furrowed in concentration. Are you drawing the band? Elena asked. No. Maya didn't stop, her eyes darting between the paper and Elena's face. Then what? Maya paused, her pencil hovering. She flipped the napkin over and slid it across the mahogany toward Elena. Elena looked down. It was a sketch of a bird, trapped, its wings pinned against the bars of a cage. But as she looked closer, she saw that the latch was open. The door was hanging ajar. You're not in a cage, Elena, Maya said, her voice dropping to a whisper that only Elena could hear over the saxophone. You're just afraid to step out. Elena felt a shiver trace the line of her spine. She looked up at Maya, who was watching her with an intensity that made the air feel thin. The ambiguity of the moment was intoxicating. It was the pull of the ocean tide, the drag of the current, a dangerous, beautiful thing that promised to drown her or set her free. And what if I don't know how to fly? Elena asked. Maya leaned closer, the scent of rain and graphite intoxicating. Then I'll jump with you. The room seemed to tilt on its axis. The bartender placed their drinks down, 2 glasses of amber liquid, the ice clinking softly. Elena picked hers up, the stem of the glass cool in her hand. She clinked it against Maya's. To jumping, Elena said. To the landing, Maya replied. They drank, the liquid burning a pleasant heat down Elena's throat. She knew, with a sudden, sinking, exhilarating clarity, that she wasn't going home anytime soon. She was going to stay right here, in this booth, in this rain-swept bar, and see exactly what happened when the walls finally came down. She turned to Maya, and for the first time that night, Elena didn't look at the stage. She didn't look at the clock. She looked only at the woman who had walked into her life like a storm, uninvited and impossible to ignore. Tell me, Elena said, her voice daringly soft. What do you do when you're not out here, corrupting people in jazz bars? Maya laughed, a sound like glass chimes in the wind. I create worlds, Elena. And I think, just maybe, I'm about to create one with you. The night stretched out before them, an endless, unwritten page, and for once, Elena didn't reach for her pen to control the narrative. She just watched, waited, and let the silence, and the woman beside her, fill the room. The jazz band shifted from a melancholy saxophone solo into a faster, more aggressive tempo. The bassist dug into the strings, a heavy, rhythmic thrumming that pulsed through the floorboards and up into the soles of Elena's heels. She sat, still, her spine straight as a ruler, watching Maya. Maya was sketching again. She didn't look up. Her charcoal-stained fingers moved with a rhythmic violence, scratching at the paper. It was a stark contrast to the way Elena handled a brief. Elena's work was about containment, Words placed in specific order, arguments locked into logical boxes, silence used as a tactical weapon. Maya's work, apparently, was about letting everything spill out and finding the pattern in the mess. "You're staring," Maya said. She didn't pause, her hand still flying across the page. "I'm observing," Elena corrected, her voice steady. "There's a difference." "Is there?" Maya finally looked up. Her eyes were dark, illuminated only by the flicker of the candle between them. Observation is passive. Staring implies interest. You're interested in why I do what I do. I'm interested in why you're so comfortable being a chaotic variable in a room that thrives on structure, Elena replied. She took a sip of her gin. It was the third glass. The sharp, botanical bite had dulled, replaced by a warm, radiating buzz in her limbs. Structure is just a collective agreement to ignore how fragile things are, Maya countered. She closed her sketchbook with a soft thud. You, for example. You're wearing a suit that costs more than my studio equipment, you have a firm grip on your glass, and you haven't checked your phone in 2 hours. You're terrified that if you let go, the whole world will stop revolving. Elena set her glass down. The sound was too loud in the sudden pause between songs. And you? If you stop sketching, does the world cease to exist? Maya laughed. It was a genuine sound, rich and unforced. No. But I might. They sat in the quiet. It was the kind of silence that existed in a vacuum, where every breath, every movement, carried a heavier charge. Elena found herself leaning forward, drawn into the radius of Maya's presence. It was a pull she couldn't rationalize, and that bothered her more than the later or the fact that she was drinking on a Tuesday. Show me, Elena said. Show you what? The sketch. The one you just made. Maya hesitated. It was the first time she had looked unsure. She bit her lip, a small, involuntary motion that Elena tracked with agonizing precision. It's not finished. You said you like honesty, Elena reminded her, using Maya's own words against her. Show me. Maya slid the book across the bar. Elena opened it. She expected a portrait. A study of the band, or perhaps the architecture of the bar. What she found instead was a sketch of herself. It wasn't a flattering picture in the traditional sense. It wasn't the polished, composed version of Elena that she presented to the world. It was a study of the moment she had been at her most vulnerable, the exact second before she had spoken to Maya. The artist had captured the tension in her jaw, the way her eyes were slightly unfocused, searching for an anchor. But more than that, she had captured a kind of quiet hunger in Elena's expression, a desire to be seen, to be understood, hidden behind a fortress of professional indifference. Elena stared at the page, the graphite strokes tracing the vulnerability she fought every day to suppress. She felt a heat rise in her chest, a mixture of embarrassment and something far more dangerous. You look like you're waiting for someone to dismantle you, Maya whispered. Elena looked up, her gaze snapping to Maya's. The artist was leaning in, her face inches from Elena's. The air between them was thick, a tangible thing. Is that what you think you're doing? I think, Maya said, her voice dropping to a low, melodic register, that I'm just waiting for you to realize that being dismantled isn't the same as being broken. Elena's heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic rhythm that felt entirely out of place in her disciplined existence. She knew she should stand up. She should pay the tab, walk out that door, and return to her life of structure and predictability. But the way Maya was looking at her, with that intense, unblinking curiosity, held her captive. "You are a dangerous person to meet at midnight," Elena murmured. "And you," Maya countered, tracing the rim of her own glass with a slow, deliberate finger, "are a dangerous person to know. Because you don't do anything halfway, do you? You're either all in, or you're invisible. I prefer control." "Control is a lie we tell ourselves to sleep at night," Maya said. She reached out, not to touch Elena, but to retrieve her sketchbook. As she pulled it back, her fingers brushed against Elena's hand. The contact was brief, a fleeting, accidental grazing of skin, but it sent a jolt of electricity through Elena's arm. She didn't pull away. Neither did Maya. For a heartbeat, the world seemed to freeze. The music faded into the background, the ambient chatter of the bar dimmed, and there was only the heat of Maya's skin against hers. Maya pulled her hand back, but the residue of the touch remained. She looked at Elena, her expression unreadable. "The bar is closing." Elena blinked, the transition back to reality jarring. She looked around. The room was thinning out. The bartender was wiping down the mahogany, his movements slow and final. The neon lights outside were humming, casting long, colored shadows across the floor. "Yes," Elena said, her voice sounding strange to her own ears. "I suppose it is." They stood up together. The movement was synchronized, a natural alignment of their bodies. As they walked toward the door, Elena felt a strange sensation of displacement. She was still the same person, the lawyer, the strategist, the woman who lived by her calendar, but the world she was stepping back into felt different. Less defined. More uncertain. They stepped out into the night. The storm had not stopped, it had only changed its tone. The rain was steady now, a persistent, cold drizzle that coated the pavement in a slick, black sheen. The city was quiet, the streetlights reflecting in the puddles like shattered glass. Elena pulled her coat tight around her, the cold hitting her like a physical blow. She realized, with a sinking feeling, that she had no idea where her car was. She had parked a few blocks away, and in her state of mind, she had completely lost her bearings. "Lost?" Maya asked. She was standing next to her, her coat unbuttoned, her hair damp against her forehead. She seemed entirely unbothered by the cold. "Disoriented," Elena corrected. "I parked on Wacker. I think." "That's 6 blocks that way," Maya said, pointing into the dark. "And you're wearing heels." "In a deluge." "I'm capable of walking," Elena said, though she knew the statement was optimistic at best. Maya didn't say anything for a long moment. She stood in the rain, watching the water run down the side of her sketchbook, which she held protectively against her chest. Then, she stepped closer to Elena. The proximity was immediate. Maya smelled of rain, cedar, and the faint, sweet scent of the gin they had been drinking. "Come with me," Maya said. "Where?" "My studio. It's 2 blocks away. You can wait out the worst of this, get a coffee, warm up. Then you can walk to your car when you aren't risking frostbite." It was a preposterous suggestion. It violated every rule of safety Elena had ever learned. It was chaotic, reckless, and entirely imprudent. "I don't know you," Elena said, though she felt the resistance draining out of her. "No," Maya agreed, her eyes bright in the dark. "You don't. Isn't that the point?" Elena looked at the street, empty and desolate, and then at Maya, who was standing there, a beacon of color in the monochrome night. She looked at the sketch in her mind, the bird in the open cage. 2 blocks, Elena said. 2 blocks, Maya confirmed. They started walking. The city felt different at 2 a.m. It felt like a stage set after the actors had gone home, leaving the secrets of the day behind. As they walked, their shoulders brushed repeatedly, accidental, then intentional, then simply constant. It was a tether, an invisible line connecting them as they navigated the slick, dark sidewalks. "Why do you live like that?" Maya asked suddenly, her voice cutting through the sound of the rain. "The structure. The schedules. The control." Elena looked straight ahead. The rain was beginning to seep through the collar of her coat. "Because I like to know what's coming next. I like to be prepared." "But if you're always prepared, you never get surprised," Maya said. "And the best things, the things that actually change you, they aren't on the calendar, Elena. They happen in the margins. In the cracks. And if those cracks are dangerous, then you learn to jump," Maya said, stopping at a red door in an alleyway illuminated by a single, flickering street lamp. She fumbled with her keys, her fingers clumsy and cold. Elena watched her, the silence of the alley amplifying the sound of the rain against the metal dumpster nearby. Maya finally pushed the door open, revealing a stairwell that disappeared into the dark. "After you," Maya said, stepping aside. Elena looked up the dark stairwell, then back at Maya. She felt a familiar, sharp spike of anxiety, the voice in her head telling her to turn around and run. But the desire to see what was behind this door, to see the world this chaotic, magnetic woman had built for herself, was stronger. She stepped inside. The smell hit her first, turpentine, old paper, coffee, and a faint, lingering scent of jasmine. It was a sensory overload, a complete departure from the sterile, sanitized environment Elena inhabited. Maya flipped a switch, and the room flooded with light. It was a studio, but that term didn't do it justice. It was a library of experiences. Walls were lined with canvases, some finished, some barely started, some just messes of color. Books were stacked in precarious towers on every surface. There were jars of brushes, dried flowers, and a large, velvet armchair that looked like it had been salvaged from a bygone era. It was messy. It was cluttered. It was beautiful. "Make yourself at home," Maya said, tossing her bag onto a table and turning to Elena. She looked different here, more at ease, more grounded. She looked at Elena, really looked at her, and the tension that had been building in the bar suddenly shifted. It wasn't just anticipation anymore. It was something more direct. "It's..." Elena started, then stopped. She searched for the right word, but the vocabulary of her life didn't seem to apply here. "It's honest." Maya smiled, a slow, predatory thing that Elena found she didn't want to escape from. "I told you. I don't believe in masks." Maya walked over to a small, cluttered kitchenette. "Coffee? Or do you need something stronger?" "Coffee is fine," Elena said. She walked over to the velvet chair and sat down, her legs feeling heavy. The adrenaline of the decision was beginning to fade, leaving a strange, hollowed-out feeling in its place. She felt exposed here, in the middle of Maya's world, with none of her own defenses. Maya moved around the kitchen with an ease that Elena envied. She watched the way Maya's hair moved as she turned, the way her shoulders relaxed when she thought she wasn't being watched. "You're very quiet, Elena," Maya said, pouring water into a kettle. "I'm processing," Elena replied. "Processing what?" "The fact that I'm in a stranger's studio in the middle of the night, waiting for coffee, while my life continues on without me. Maya leaned against the counter, her arms crossed. Your life is right here. You're living it. You're just not running it for a few hours. That's a terrifying thought. It's a necessary one, Maya corrected. She brought 2 mugs over and set them on the table near the chair. She didn't sit down. She stood in front of Elena, looming over her, a dark silhouette against the backdrop of her paintings. Tell me, Elena, Maya said, her voice dropping, losing its playful edge. If you weren't the person everyone expects you to be, the lawyer, the daughter, the success, who would you be? Elena looked up at her. The question was intrusive, rude, and deeply personal. It was the kind of question she would have shut down in a second. But here, in the smell of paint and jasmine, with the rain hammering against the skylight above them, it felt like the only question that mattered. I don't know, Elena admitted, the words feeling heavy on her tongue. Maya reached out. This time, she didn't hesitate. She didn't offer a polite, distance-maintaining gesture. She placed a hand on the arm of the chair, right next to Elena's leg. She leaned in, not touching Elena, but invading her space, forcing her to breathe the same air. Then stay, Maya whispered. Stay long enough to find out. Elena's pulse quickened. The ambiguity was no longer a question, it was an invitation. She looked at Maya, at the graphite on her fingers, the intensity in her eyes, the sheer, unyielding force of her personality, and she felt the walls she had spent years building start to crack. Just for a little while, Elena said. Just for a little while, Maya agreed. The rain continued to fall, a steady, relentless rhythm against the roof, sealing them into this small, chaotic, beautiful world. And for the first time in her life, Elena didn't check the time. She didn't look for the exit. She sat in the velvet chair, held the warm mug against her palm, and waited to see what would happen next. The atmosphere in the room changed, shifting from the energetic chaos of the studio to something quieter, deeper. Maya moved to the window, watching the rain streak against the glass. You know, Maya said, her back to Elena. People think artists are flighty. That we don't care about consequences. But we're the ones who look at the consequences more closely than anyone else. We have to, because we're the ones creating them. You think this is a consequence? Elena asked, her voice soft. Maya turned around. Her expression was guarded, vulnerable. I think you walking through that door was a choice. A choice that has a lot of consequences for the both of us. And are you afraid of them? Maya walked back toward her, her steps slow and deliberate. She stopped right in front of the chair. I'm terrified. But I'm also interested. Aren't you? Elena looked at her. She saw the uncertainty, the fear, the hunger. She saw her own reflection in Maya's eyes, distorted and reshaped. She realized that she wasn't looking at a stranger anymore. She was looking at a mirror. Yes, Elena said. I'm interested. Maya reached out, this time not stopping at the chair. She reached up, her fingers grazing Elena's jawline, the touch light as a feather, but electric as a lightning strike. Elena caught her breath, her eyes fluttering closed. The contact sent a jolt of heat through her body. It was an invasion, a breach of her carefully constructed boundaries, but it was one she wanted to welcome. She felt Maya's thumb trace the line of her cheek, then the curve of her lower lip. You have such a serious mouth, Maya whispered, her voice barely audible. I wonder what it would sound like if you let yourself make a noise. Elena opened her eyes. They were inches apart. She could see the flecks of gold in Maya's dark irises, the pulse beating in the hollow of her throat. "Maya," Elena said, her name a plea and a warning. "Elena," Maya replied, her voice a promise. The air in the room was electric, the tension between them snapping like a live wire. Elena knew that if she moved, if she closed the distance, there would be no going back. The wall was already broken. The cage door was open. But as she looked at Maya, she realized that she didn't want to go back. She didn't want to return to the silence, to the routine, to the controlled, safe emptiness of her life. She wanted this. She wanted the chaos. She wanted the risk. She reached up, her hand finding the back of Maya's neck, the skin warm and soft. "Show me," Elena whispered. Maya didn't wait. She leaned in, her lips hovering just inches from Elena's, the anticipation of physical ache. The world outside the room, the rain, the city, the time, it all ceased to exist. There was only the heat of their breath, the racing of their hearts, and the terrifying, beautiful precipice they were standing on. They were two souls drawn together by gravity, by chemistry, by the simple, inescapable pull of the unknown. And as Elena pulled Maya closer, she knew that whatever happened next, whatever the consequences were, it would be the most honest thing she had ever done. The night deepened, the city settled, but in the small, chaotic room, time had stopped. They were caught in the eye of the storm, perfectly still, perfectly aware, and perfectly on the verge of falling into the abyss. And for the first time, Elena wasn't afraid of the fall. She was ready to fly. The space between them was a vacuum, a place where air felt heavy, charged with the static of things unsaid. When Elena pulled back, it was a physical effort, as if she were dragging her consciousness out of a deep, dark current. Her heart was a frantic drum against her ribs, echoing in the quiet of the studio. Maya didn't pursue. She stood her ground, her hands retreating to the small of her back. The sudden distance felt like a loss, a withdrawal of heat that left the skin of Elena's neck tingling. The neon light from the alleyway filtered through the grimy window, casting long, fractured shadows across Maya's face. She looked at Elena with eyes that were no longer playful, they were searchlights, peeling back the layers of Elena's composure. "That," Maya said, her voice a low rasp that didn't quite reach its usual steady cadence, "was a mistake." "Was it?" Elena asked, though she wasn't sure if she was asking Maya or herself. She adjusted her blazer, a nervous habit, straightening the lapel that hadn't moved. The gesture was purely defensive. In the context of everything, Maya said, turning toward the window, it was a massive tactical error. "We're two strangers who met in a bar 3 hours ago. We shouldn't be standing in a private room, vibrating with whatever this is." Elena walked over to a stack of canvases propped against the exposed brick wall. She needed to look at something, anything, that wasn't Maya's mouth. She focused on a painting, a chaotic swirl of deep blues and jagged, angry reds. It looked like a storm captured in oil. It was raw, unrefined, and painfully honest. "I don't make mistakes," Elena said, her voice regaining some of its professional steel. "I make decisions." "And what decision is this?" Maya asked, moving to stand beside her. She didn't touch her, but the proximity was enough to raise the temperature in the room. "The decision to see where the rabbit hole ends." "The decision to be curious," Elena countered. She pointed to the painting. "This." "Why the red?" "It ruins the symmetry of the blue." "Because reality isn't symmetrical," Maya replied, her gaze tracking Elena's finger. You spend your life trying to find order in the law, don't you? Precedents, clauses, outcomes. You try to force the world into a shape that makes sense. It's not about forcing it, Elena said, turning to face her. It's about protecting it. Chaos destroys things. It burns them down. I prefer to build. And you think this, Maya gestured to the room, to the paint-stained floor and the coffee cups scattered on the table, is destruction. I think it's instability, Elena said. She looked at Maya, really looked at her. I think you thrive on it. And I think that's why you're so dangerous. Dangerous. A slow, knowing smile spread across Maya's face. Because I don't follow your rulebook. Because I don't wait for a sign, or a contract, or a scheduled meeting. Because you make me want to ignore the rules, Elena admitted. The honesty of the confession startled her. She hadn't meant to say it, but the air in the studio, heavy with the scent of turpentine and rain, seemed to dissolve her filters. Maya stepped closer. This time, she reached out, her fingers hovering just an inch from Elena's collarbone. The electric pull was back, a magnetic field that threatened to override every logical impulse in Elena's brain. Ignoring the rules is how you find out who you actually are, Elena. You're so busy being a lawyer, a success, a person who never misses a deadline. When was the last time you did something just because it felt like the only thing you could do? Elena opened her mouth to argue, but the words died in her throat. She searched her memory, the last year, the last 5 years, and found only a blur of spreadsheets, courtrooms, and late-night dinners that served as nothing more than fuel for the next day. She had been existing. She hadn't been living. I don't know, she whispered. Exactly, Maya said. She turned away, walking over to an old, battered record player in the corner. She dropped the needle, and a moment later, a low, melancholy jazz trumpet filled the room. The music was slow, syrupy, and perfect for the atmosphere. Maya leaned against the table, crossing her arms. Coffee's ready, she said, nodding toward the kitchenette. The sudden shift in topic was jarring, a deliberate pivot meant to lower the temperature. Elena exhaled, the tension in her shoulders dropping a fraction of an inch. She walked over to the counter and picked up the mug Maya had prepared. It was a chipped ceramic thing, warm and comforting. You have an interesting way of oscillating between deep, philosophical interrogation and small talk, Elena noted, taking a sip. It was strong, black, and exactly what she needed. It keeps people on their toes, Maya replied, pouring herself a cup. And it keeps me sane. If I stayed in the deep end all the time, I'd drown. I think you'd enjoy the water, Elena said. Maya laughed, the sound warm and genuine. She pulled out a stool and sat down, patting the seat next to her. Elena hesitated, then Saturday. The studio was quiet, save for the crackle of the vinyl and the distant, muffled sound of the city. Tell me, Maya said, leaning her chin on her hand. The lawyer thing. Is it who you are, or just a suit you put on every morning? Does it have to be binary? Elena asked. For you? Probably. You like to compartmentalize. Elena swirled the coffee in her mug. I like the law because it's definitive. It's the closest thing to truth we have in a world that's constantly shifting. I like being the person who can look at a problem, dissect it, and find the solution. It's satisfying. It's anchoring. Anchoring, Maya repeated, testing the word. Like a cage. Like a foundation, Elena corrected. Without a foundation, you just drift. Drifting can be fun, Maya said. You should try it sometime. Without a map. Without a GPS. Just seeing where the wind takes you. I have responsibilities, Maya. I don't have the luxury of drifting. Everyone has the luxury of taking a night off, Maya said. Even you. Elena looked at her. She saw the challenge, the invitation, and the genuine curiosity in Maya's expression. She wasn't just baiting her, she was interested in the architecture of Elena's life. And for some reason, that made the walls feel less like barriers and more like a fortress she was tired of defending. Maybe, Elena conceded. The conversation drifted, moving away from the heavy philosophical weight and into the lighter, more comfortable territory of the mundane. They talked about books, about the city, about the absurdities of life in Chicago. Maya spoke with a chaotic, brilliant energy that made the room feel brighter, more vibrant. Elena found herself laughing, a genuine, unguarded laugh that she hadn't realized she'd been withholding for months. As the hours ticked by, the storm outside settled into a steady, rhythmic rain. The room felt smaller, more intimate, a private island in the middle of a drowned city. Maya stood up, moving to a rack of drying canvases. She began to sort through them, her movements fluid and practiced. I have a project, she said, not looking back. A commission. It's supposed to be a representation of control. The irony is not lost on me. And how is it going? Elena asked. Terribly. I can't find the right angle. Maya turned, holding up a blank canvas. I keep trying to make it look rigid. Sharp lines. Geometric shapes. It feels dead. Because control isn't rigid, Elena said, standing up and walking over to her. She looked at the blank surface. Control isn't the absence of movement. It's the management of it. It's the way you steer a ship through a storm. It's not about standing still, it's about moving forward while keeping your balance. Maya stared at her, her expression unreadable. She walked over to her desk, picked up a palette knife, and handed it to Elena. Show me, Maya said. Elena held the tool. It felt strange in her hand, the weight of it, the cold steel. She looked at the canvas. The air in the room grew thick again, charged with the same electricity as before. I'm not an artist, Elena said. Neither am I, not really, Maya replied. I'm just an observer. Show me what you see. Elena stepped up to the canvas. She looked at the blank space, and for a moment, she saw not lines, but feelings. The rigid, cold structure of her daily life, the grey, the black, the white, and then, the sudden, sharp, vibrant intrusion of color that had walked into the jazz bar tonight. She pressed the knife into a blob of deep indigo and swept it across the canvas. It wasn't a straight line. It was a curve, a movement, a shift. She added a slash of gold, erratic and bright. She worked for minutes, or maybe hours, she couldn't tell. She didn't think about the law. She didn't think about the time, or the rain, or the fact that she had a board meeting in the morning. She just focused on the sensation of the paint, the movement, the release. When she finally pulled back, her hand was trembling. The canvas was a mess of color, a storm of motion that felt, in its own way, like a perfect, accurate representation of her internal state. She turned to see Maya watching her. The artist was leaning against the wall, her arms crossed, her eyes wide. She looked at the canvas, then back at Elena. The expression on her face was one of profound shock. You said you weren't an artist, Maya whispered. I'm not, Elena said, wiping her hands on a rag. She felt exhilarated, a flush rising in her cheeks. I felt like I needed to put it somewhere. Maya walked over to the canvas, her eyes tracing the strokes Elena had made. She didn't say anything for a long time. Then, she turned to Elena, and the intensity of her gaze was almost overwhelming. You have a lot of noise inside you, Elena, she said softly. You hide it well, but it's there. And it's beautiful. The compliment hit Elena like a physical blow, a sudden, sharp intake of breath. She realized that she was vulnerable, more vulnerable than she had been in years. She had let someone see her, not the polished, professional exterior, but the messy, complicated, feeling person underneath. And the terrifying part. She didn't want to hide anymore. Maya, she said, her voice dropping. Maya stepped into her space. This time, there was no hesitation. She reached out, her fingers cupping Elena's face, her thumb tracing the line of her jaw. The touch was soft, deliberate, and undeniably intimate. You're still here, Maya murmured. I'm still here, Elena agreed. The space between them vanished. The room narrowed down to the two of them, the smell of paint and coffee, and the low, throbbing beat of the jazz music in the background. The wall was down. The gate was open. Elena leaned in, her eyes closing, the world spinning on a single, fragile axis. The anticipation was a physical ache, a craving she hadn't realized she possessed until this exact moment. She wasn't thinking about the law. She wasn't thinking about consequences. She wasn't thinking about anything at all, except for the woman in front of her. And in that moment, in the dark, rain-swept heart of the city, everything else simply ceased to exist. There was only the quiet, the art, and the terrifying, beautiful promise of what was about to happen. Maya's lips were soft, hovering just a breath away, and Elena knew, with a certainty that shook her to her core, that she was done running. She was done with the structure. She was ready for the chaos. Tell me, Elena whispered, her breath brushing against Maya's skin. Do you have any idea what you've done? Maya smiled, a secret, triumphant expression that lit up the dimly lit studio. I think I do, she said, her voice dropping to a low, husky promise. I think I've just invited you to begin. And as she leaned the final inch, closing the distance, Elena realized that the painting on the canvas wasn't just a mess of color. It was a beginning. A new draft. A new life. She was no longer waiting for the storm to pass. She was finally, for the first time, ready to be in it. The kiss was not an explosion, it was a thawing. It began tentatively, a cautious negotiation of boundaries, as if they were both testing the structural integrity of the bridge they had just built. Then, it deepened, shedding the hesitation of the night. Elena felt the phantom weight of her professional life, the billable hours, the court motions, the carefully curated public image, dissolve into the background noise of the city. There was only the taste of cold coffee, the sharp, metallic tang of oil paint on Maya's skin, and the terrifying realization that she had surrendered. Maya pulled back first, her forehead resting against Elena's. Her breath was ragged, hitching in the quiet air of the studio. Elena kept her eyes closed for a moment longer, savoring the vertigo, the sensation of gravity having completely inverted. When she finally opened her eyes, she found Maya watching her with a look of quiet triumph, mixed with something far more vulnerable, a flicker of doubt. You're shaking, Maya whispered. Elena didn't pull away. She couldn't. I'm just. She searched for a word that fit, but her vocabulary, usually sharp and precise, felt dull. I'm not used to this. To what? Being impulsive. Maya's thumb grazed Elena's lower lip. The touch sent a fresh wave of heat through Elena's veins. Or to being seen. Both, Elena admitted. She looked down at their hands. Maya's fingers were stained with indigo and gold, a stark contrast against the clean, pale silk of Elena's blouse. The image was a metaphor she didn't want to analyze. It was too close to the truth. The room was still dark, but the edges of the night were fraying. A thin, grey line of dawn was beginning to bleed through the skylight, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air. The rain had stopped, leaving behind a silence so absolute it felt heavy. Elena sat back on the velvet chair, her limbs heavy with a strange, pleasant exhaustion. She looked around the studio, the chaos of the canvases, the precariously balanced books, the sheer, messy humanity of it all. It used to look like a hazard. Now, it looked like a refuge. What happens now? Elena asked. The question was mundane, a lawyer's reflex, but the subtext was desperate. She was asking about the consequences, about the aftermath of this departure from her script. Maya walked over to the window, pulling the heavy curtain aside. The grey morning light poured in, washing out the shadows and revealing the reality of the room. She turned back to look at Elena, her silhouette framed by the window. Now, Maya said, her voice steadying, you decide if this was a momentary lapse in judgment or the beginning of a different kind of reality. That's a false dichotomy, Elena countered, the lawyer in her reasserting itself. Is it? Maya walked back to the chair and crouched down, bringing herself to eye level with Elena. You came here because you were tired of your life. You came here because you wanted to see what was behind the curtain. You've seen it. You've tasted it. Now you have to decide if you want to keep living in the dark, or if you're going to step into the light. It's not that simple, Maya. My life has a structure. It has commitments. Everyone has commitments, Maya said. The question is whether you're committed to the right things. Are you committed to your career, or are you committed to your own happiness? Because, from where I'm standing, those two things are currently at war. Elena didn't answer. She knew Maya was right, and that was what made it impossible to argue. She reached out, her hand hovering in the air before she finally touched Maya's hair. It was softer than she expected, a tangle of dark, unruly waves. I've spent my entire adult life building a fortress, Elena said, her voice barely a whisper. I've spent so much time making sure nothing could touch me that I forgot what it felt like to be touched. Maya leaned into her hand, a soft, purring sound escaping her throat. Then stopped building. Let the fortress crumble. It's exhausting, isn't it? Carrying all that weight. It is, Elena confessed. The admission felt like a physical weight lifting from her chest. They sat in the silence for a long time, the dawn light slowly brightening the room. It was a comfortable silence now, stripped of the frantic energy that had defined their meeting at the bar. It was the silence of two people who had recognized something in each other, a shared brokenness, a shared desire to be something more than the roles they played. I have to go, Elena said, though the words felt like a betrayal. I have a meeting at 9. I know, Maya said. She stood up and offered a hand to help Elena up. When their hands met, the contact was different this time. It was firm, grounded. A promise. Will I see you again? Elena asked. She hated how needy it sounded, but she didn't care. Maya smiled, that secret, triumphant look returning to her face. She reached into her pocket, pulled out a charcoal pencil, and grabbed a scrap of paper from the desk. She scribbled something down and pressed it into Elena's palm. "That's my number," Maya said. "And the address of my favorite gallery. I'm having an exhibition next month. It's not a formal invitation, and it's definitely not on your schedule." Elena looked at the paper, then back at Maya. "I'm not very good at being unpredictable." "Then I'll be the unpredictability for both of us," Maya replied. Elena gathered her coat. As she put it on, she felt like she was dressing in a costume. She was wrapping herself back into the identity of the successful lawyer, the woman of control, the woman of stone. But as she buttoned the collar, she realized the stone was cracked. The light was getting in. "Thank you," Elena said at the door. "For what?" "For the coffee. And for the honesty." "Don't thank me yet," Maya said, leaning against the doorframe. "We haven't even started the hard part." Elena paused, her hand on the brass knob. "Which part is that?" "The part where you have to decide who you're going to be when you're not in my studio," Maya said. Elena opened the door and stepped out into the hallway. The air was cool and smelled of stale city life, a sharp contrast to the warmth and jasmine of the studio. She walked down the stairs, her heart beating a steady, rhythmic thud. When she stepped out onto the sidewalk, the city was waking up. The street sweepers were out, the early commuters were rushing toward the subway, and the world was beginning its relentless, scheduled march. Everything was the same as it had been last night. The buildings were the same, the sounds were the same, the air was the same. But Elena was not. She walked toward her car, parked a few blocks away. She navigated the sidewalk with the same efficiency she always did, but her mind was elsewhere. It was back in the studio, with the smell of paint and the memory of a touch. It was back in the moment where she had realized that she wasn't just a lawyer, she was a woman capable of desire, of risk, of chaos. She reached her car and unlocked it. As she sat in the driver's seat, she looked at the scrap of paper Maya had given her. It was folded neatly, but the graphite was smeared, a smudge of black ink against the white. She turned the key in the ignition, but she didn't drive away immediately. She sat for a moment, listening to the engine hum, watching the city traffic flow around her. She looked at her hands on the steering wheel, the manicured nails, the watch, the expensive leather gloves on the passenger seat. They looked like props in a play. She picked up the paper and tucked it into her wallet, right next to her business cards and her credit cards. It was a foreign object, a piece of someone else's life, but it felt like the only thing of value she carried. She pulled out into traffic, merging into the stream of cars. As she drove, she found herself thinking not about the deposition she had to prepare for, or the client who was waiting for her update, but about the way Maya's hair had felt under her fingers. She knew, with a sudden, sinking, exhilarating clarity, that she wasn't going to delete the number. She wasn't going to tuck this away in a drawer and forget about it. She was going to wait. She was going to count the days until the exhibition, and maybe, just maybe, she would find a reason to call before then. The city was vast, indifferent, and concrete. But for the first time in her life, it felt like a playground, a place where anything could happen if she just loosened her grip on the steering wheel. She drove toward her office, but she didn't feel like the same person who had left her apartment the night before. The wall she had built, the fortress of her own design, had been breached. She wasn't standing in the ruins, though. She was standing on a foundation that felt, for the first time, like it belonged to her. She pulled into the parking garage of her firm, the familiar, sterile scent of concrete and exhaust filling the car. She parked in her designated spot, smoothed out her blazer, and checked her reflection in the rearview mirror. She looked the same. The same sharp eyes, the same composed expression, the same poise. But as she stepped out of the car, she caught her own reflection in the window of the elevator. She saw the ghost of a smile playing on her lips, a look of secrets kept and questions unasked. She saw a woman who knew something the rest of the world didn't. She walked toward the elevator, the familiar rhythm of her heels echoing against the concrete. She pressed the button for the 40th floor. As the doors slid shut, she reached into her pocket and felt the corner of the scrap of paper. She didn't know what the future held. She didn't know how she was going to balance the lawyer and the woman, the structure and the chaos, the life she had built and the life she was beginning to want. But as the elevator climbed, she didn't check her watch. She didn't check her calendar. She just breathed, felt the weight of the paper in her pocket, and waited to see what the day would bring. The game had changed, and for the first time, Elena was playing by her own rules. She stepped out of the elevator into the lobby, the bright, polished marble reflecting the morning light. She nodded to the receptionist, offered a polite, practiced smile, and walked toward her office. She was back in her world. But it no longer felt like a cage. It felt like a stage. And she was finally, absolutely, ready for the next act. The phone on her desk was blinking with a notification, a message from her lead partner about the pending case. She sat down, her heart steady, her mind clear. She picked up the receiver, dialed the extension, and began the work. But as she spoke, as she dissected the arguments and laid out the strategy, she caught herself looking out the window at the skyline, at the clouds drifting over the city, and she found herself wondering. Was Maya awake yet? Was she painting? Was she thinking about the woman who had walked into her studio and changed the trajectory of the night? The thought was a dangerous distraction. It was a crack in the veneer. And it was exactly what she needed. She hung up the phone, leaned back in her chair, and for the first time in her life, she let herself wonder, not about what she had to do next, but about what she wanted to do. The list was short. It had one name on it. Maya. And as the sun climbed higher in the sky, casting long, golden shadows across the office, Elena knew that this was just the beginning. The storm had passed, the rain had cleared, and the city was waiting. And so was she. The 40th floor of the Sterling Vance building was a cathedral of efficiency. Every glass partition, every polished mahogany desk, every hushed conversation carried the weight of $1 million transaction. For Elena, it had always been the center of her universe. The sterile, climate-controlled air usually acted as a sedative, smoothing out the jagged edges of her day. Today, however, it felt like an oxygen-deprived vacuum. She sat at her desk, the glowing screen of her laptop displaying a merger agreement that required her absolute scrutiny. Her eyes tracked the clauses, indemnification, liabilities, assets, but the words refused to coalesce into meaning. They were just ink on a page, empty shells. Her mind, treacherous and disobedient, kept returning to the smell of linseed oil, the tactile memory of a velvet armchair, and the way the morning light had caught the stray hairs at Maya's temple. Her phone, usually relegated to a silent block of glass in the corner of her desk, suddenly vibrated. It was a sharp, aggressive sound in the quiet office. Elena didn't immediately reach for it. She allowed herself a moment of hesitation, a lawyer's pause before a cross-examination. Her pulse, a traitorous rhythm, quickened. She picked it up. The light in here is wrong. It misses your shadow. The message was unsigned, but it needed no identification. Elena felt a flush rise to her cheeks, a heat that had nothing to do with the office heating system. She stared at the screen, her thumbs hovering over the keyboard. A standard, professional response would be to ignore it, or to send a polite, neutral acknowledgement that effectively shut down the flirtation. She deleted her first 3 drafts. They were too stiff, too defensive. Liability, she typed, then backspaced. Too busy, she typed, then deleted. She took a breath, the air from the vents suddenly feeling sharper, cleaner. I suspect the fault lies with the artist, not the lighting, she replied. She hit send before her better judgment could intervene. Immediately, she felt the familiar itch of panic, the fear of having crossed a line, of having signaled vulnerability. But beneath the panic was a strange, soaring lightness. She had stepped off the ledge. 2 miles away, in the cramped, sun-drenched chaos of her studio, Maya read the message and laughed. The sound startled a pigeon from the windowsill. She didn't need to look at the screen to know who it was. The tone was unmistakably Elena, structured, dry, yet undeniably biting. Maya leaned back, propping her boots up on an old stool. The studio was a graveyard of abandoned concepts, half-finished sketches of cityscapes, rejected color palettes, and crumpled paper. But in the center of the room, on the easel she had pulled into the light of the skylight, sat the canvas Elena had touched. She hadn't painted over it. She hadn't changed a stroke. She had simply been sitting there for an hour, staring at the indigo and gold streaks, trying to map the geometry of Elena's mind. An artist deals in perception, Maya typed back, her fingers moving with a rhythm that matched the ticking of her old wall clock. If you were here, I'd show you that perception is just a matter of where you choose to stand. She watched the typing bubbles appear. Elena was writing, then stopping, then writing again. I am currently standing in a high-rise office, negotiating a settlement that is significantly less interesting than the conversation we aren't having, Elena wrote. Maya smirked. The woman was bold. She liked the way Elena's professional mask was slipping, revealing the sharper, more reckless person underneath. Then leave, Maya replied. The city is loud today. It wants to be ignored. I have obligations, came the inevitable response. And, quite frankly, I have a reputation to maintain. Reputations are just stories we tell people so they don't ask questions, Maya tapped out. I'm interested in the truth. Come over when you're done. I have a bottle of red, some terrible jazz, and a blank canvas that is begging for your input. There was a long silence. Maya stood up, walking to the kitchenette to put the kettle on. The studio felt quiet, but it was a vibrant, expectant silence. She didn't expect a yes. Elena was the type of person who needed a plan, a map, a guarantee of safe passage. The phone chimed again. What time? Maya paused, the kettle forgotten in her hand. A slow, genuine smile spread across her face. The game had shifted. The wall hadn't just been breached, it was being dismantled, brick by brick. Whenever you can stop playing the lawyer, she sent. I'll be here. She set the phone down and turned back to the easel. The painting no longer looked like an abstract mess to her. It looked like an invitation. She picked up a brush, dipped it into a vibrant shade of crimson, and carefully added a single, small accent to the bottom corner, a flourish that looked, quite intentionally, like a signature. Back at the firm, Elena locked her phone screen. Her hands were steady, but her heart was hammering against her ribs like a bird in a cage. She looked around the office. Her assistant, Sarah, was standing in the doorway with a stack of files. "The Henderson brief, Elena?" Sarah asked, her voice professional and crisp. "The partners are asking for the final draft by 4. Elena looked at the stack of papers. It represented everything she had worked for, the promotion, the salary, the prestige. It was a monument to the life she had curated. "I'll have it by 5, Elena said. Her voice was firm, steady, and entirely in control. Sarah blinked, surprised by the slight delay, but nodded and retreated. Elena turned back to her computer. She opened the document, but she didn't begin typing. Instead, she sat in the stillness of her office, the hum of the city drifting up from the streets below. She thought of the studio, the smell of turpentine, and the woman who was waiting for her in a room full of colors. She realized then that she hadn't just agreed to a drink. She had agreed to an experiment. She was going to see if she could exist in both worlds, the world of order and the world of art, the world of contracts and the world of chaos. She placed her hands on the keyboard and began to type. But as she worked, her mind was already drifting, navigating the geography of the city, counting down the hours until the sun would dip below the skyline and she could shed the suit, the title, and the expectations. She wasn't just a lawyer anymore. She was a woman with a secret, a woman with a destination, and for the first time in a long time, the path ahead felt entirely her own. She worked with a focus she hadn't felt in years, efficient and swift, clearing the hurdles of her day with a precision that bordered on surgical. She was clearing the board. She was making room. When the clock finally ticked to 5, she didn't linger. She didn't organize her pens. She didn't straighten the papers on her desk. She closed her laptop, grabbed her coat, and walked toward the elevator. As the doors closed, sealing her away from the office, she caught her reflection in the stainless steel. She looked the same, but the expression in her eyes was different, more dangerous, more alive. She pressed the button for the lobby, and as the elevator descended, she didn't feel the weight of the day falling away. She felt the weight of anticipation taking its place. She stepped out into the lobby, the city air rushing to meet her. It was cooler now, the sky bruising into a deep, electric purple. She walked toward the exit, her pace brisk, her mind sharp. She was going to the studio. She was going to find out what happened when the law met the paint. And she wasn't going to check her watch. The city of Chicago hummed with a friction that usually energized Elena. Tonight, it felt like static, a background noise she was desperate to tune out. She walked against the current of the evening rush, her heels clicking a rhythmic, sharp cadence against the concrete. She had stopped at a boutique wine shop 3 blocks from the studio, purchasing a bottle of heavy, dark Cabernet that felt like an act of rebellion. It was expensive, unnecessary, and entirely UN loyally. She stood before the red door in the alley, the same one that had looked so daunting only 24 hours ago. Now, it looked like a threshold. She didn't hesitate. She didn't check her watch. She knocked, a steady, deliberate thud of knuckles against wood. The door opened almost immediately. Maya stood there, framed by the warm, amber glow of the studio lights. She looked different, not the chaotic, rain-drenched stranger from the bar, but someone more centered, her hair pulled back with a messy clip, her oversized shirt stained with a smear of cerulean paint. She looked at Elena, taking in the tailored suit, the pristine blazer, and the bottle of wine in her hand. A slow smile curved her lips. "You came." I did, Elena said. Her voice sounded steady, though her pulse was doing something erratic in her throat. She stepped inside, the latch clicking shut behind her, sealing out the noise of the city. The studio smelled different tonight. The rain was gone, replaced by the sharp, earthy scent of linseed oil, turpentine, and a hint of something floral, jasmine, maybe. The space was a battlefield of creativity, strewn with sketches, half-empty coffee mugs, and canvases that seemed to be fighting for attention. I brought a peace offering, Elena said, holding out the bottle. Maya took it, her fingers grazing Elena's palm. The contact was brief, but it held a weight that made Elena's breath hitch. Maya walked over to the desk, uncorked the bottle with a practiced ease, and poured 2 glasses. I wasn't sure if you would, Maya admitted, handing a glass to Elena. She didn't retreat to the other side of the room. She stayed close, their shoulders almost touching. Most people who live in your world treat maybe as a no. I am not most people, Elena countered, taking a sip. The wine was rich, grounding her. She walked toward the easel in the center of the room. The canvas she had touched the night before was still there, but it had changed. The indigo and gold she had applied were now integrated into a larger, more complex composition. It was startling to see her own chaotic impulses woven into someone else's vision. You changed it, Elena observed, her finger tracing the air in front of the wet paint. I didn't change it, Maya said, stepping up behind her. I expanded it. You gave me the spark. I just provided the fuel. The proximity was absolute. Elena could feel the heat radiating from Maya's body. She turned, finding Maya only inches away, her eyes dark and searching. The air in the room seemed to thin, the silence magnifying the sound of their breathing. What do you want from me, Maya? Elena asked, the question cutting through the pretense of casual conversation. Maya didn't flinch. She reached out, her hand finding the lapel of Elena's blazer. She didn't pull her close, but she held her there, anchored. I want you to stop being a spectator in your own life. I want to see what happens when you let go of the steering wheel and actually move. That is a dangerous game, Elena whispered. Only if you're afraid of crashing, Maya replied. And I don't think you are. I think you're afraid of what you might see if you don't. Maya moved her hand from Elena's lapel to the side of her neck. Her thumb traced the sensitive skin just below Elena's ear, a touch that was searingly intimate. Elena's eyes fluttered shut, her head tilting back involuntarily. The wine glass in her hand felt heavy, an unnecessary weight. She set it down on a nearby stool, her movements slow and deliberate. She didn't open her eyes. She waited, suspended in the moment, caught between the gravity of her old life and the pull of this new, terrifying reality. Show me, Elena murmured. Maya didn't speak. She guided Elena's hand toward the palette on the table, thick with mounds of wet oil paint. Maya's fingers interlaced with hers, the artist's touch firm and guiding. She pressed Elena's index finger into a vibrant, brilliant cadmium yellow. Paint, Maya commanded softly, her breath against Elena's ear. Elena opened her eyes. She looked at the canvas, a blank expanse of white waiting to be conquered. She moved her hand, the sensation of the paint cool and oily against her skin. She didn't think about the merger, or the billable hours, or the partners who expected her at the office at 8 tomorrow. She focused entirely on the movement, the resistance of the canvas, the way Maya's hand moved with hers, directing the flow. It was a dance, a collaboration without words. They worked in a rhythm that felt ancient, intuitive. Maya steered, and Elena followed, their movements becoming increasingly fluid. They were no longer just applying color, they were communicating. The streaks of yellow, blue, and red became a dialogue, a visual representation of the friction between them. When they finally stopped, the canvas was a mess of swirling, passionate color. Elena was breathing hard, her chest rising and falling. She looked at the result, not a masterpiece, but an honest, raw record of the last few minutes. She looked at her hand. It was stained with yellow, smeared with blue. She looked like she had been in a fight, or a storm. She looked at Maya. The artist was watching her with an expression of intense, almost painful clarity. She didn't reach out. She waited. Elena raised her hand, the one stained with paint, and reached out to touch Maya's face. She didn't hesitate. She traced the line of Maya's cheekbone, the streak of yellow paint leaving a mark on her skin. It was a brand, a claim, a moment of undeniable possession. "You are relentless," Elena whispered. "You invited me in," Maya replied. The distance between them collapsed. Maya reached for her, her hands finding Elena's waist, pulling her closer, eliminating the space. There was no more space to negotiate. There were no more metaphors. The kiss that followed wasn't the tentative, thawing touch of the night before. It was a collision. It was the sound of a wall finally crumbling. It was the taste of wine and oil paint and the sudden, overwhelming realization that everything had changed. Elena gripped Maya's shirt, pulling her tighter, wanting to erase the boundary between them. She was losing her balance, not because of the heels, not because of the wine, but because the floor beneath her had turned to liquid. When they finally broke apart, they were both breathless, the silence of the studio rushing back in to fill the void. Elena leaned her forehead against Maya's, her eyes closed, her heart hammering against her ribs. She was here. She was messy. She was off schedule. And for the first time, she was perfectly, completely, exactly where she wanted to be. "So," Maya whispered, her voice a low, husky vibration against Elena's skin. "What now, counselor?" Elena looked at her, the yellow paint on Maya's cheek mirroring the chaos in her own heart. She smiled, a genuine, unguarded expression that she didn't bother to hide. "Now," Elena said, "we see where this goes." The silence that followed was not the heavy, charged quiet of the previous nights. It was something different, an exhale, a release of pressure. The air in the studio still held the sharp scent of turpentine and the heavy, sweet note of the Cabernet, but the electricity had settled into a steady, warm hum. Elena sat on the velvet chair, her legs drawn up, her blazer discarded on the floor somewhere near the easel. Her hands, still marked with streaks of yellow and blue, rested on her knees. She watched Maya, who was moving with a quiet efficiency, dampening a cloth in the small sink and returning to kneel in front of her. "Hold still," Maya murmured. She began to wipe the paint from Elena's skin. It was an act of profound intimacy, the cool, damp cloth against Elena's knuckles, the gentle pressure of Maya's thumb as she worked away the stains. Elena watched her, mesmerized by the focus in Maya's expression. The artist was not looking at the canvas or the room, she was looking at Elena's hand as if it were the most important piece of work she had ever encountered. "You're very quiet," Maya noted, not looking up. "I'm calculating," Elena admitted. Maya paused, the cloth suspended in the air. A small, playful smirk touched her lips. "Calculating what?" "The potential fallout. The impact on your schedule." "The shift in the baseline," Elena said. She didn't mean it as a joke. Everything I knew about my own capacity for disruption has been rewritten in the last 48 hours. Maya sat back on her heels, the cloth now discarded. She reached out, taking Elena's clean, bare hand in hers. And? Are you going to file a motion to revert to the previous version of yourself? Elena looked at her, at the paint-smudged face, the wild, dark hair, the eyes that seemed to see right through the expensive tailoring she had shed. No, she said, and the certainty of it surprised her. I think I'm going to see where this version takes me. Maya leaned forward, resting her forehead against Elena's knee. It was a gesture of trust, a softening of the defenses that had been so high just hours ago. I'm not a disruption, Elena. I'm just a different perspective. One that doesn't fit into your billable hours. I've spent so much time making sure my life was predictable that I forgot that predictability is just a polite word for stagnation, Elena said. She ran her fingers through Maya's hair, the texture rough and real against her palm. You've made that very clear. I just wanted you to see what was behind the curtains, Maya whispered. They sat in the soft light of the studio lamps, the city outside continuing its march, indifferent to the small, tectonic shift occurring in the room. For Elena, the transition was physical. She felt lighter, less defined by the rigid constraints of her office, and more connected to the pulse of her own life. What do we do now? Elena asked. It was a question she had been avoiding, the lawyer's reflex to define the terms of the engagement. Maya looked up, her expression unreadable. What do you want to do? I want to stay, Elena said. But I have to go to work in the morning. And you have your gallery exhibition. And there's this. She gestured to the studio, the art, the life Maya had built. This is your space. My world is entirely separate. Worlds intersect, Elena, Maya said, standing up and pulling Elena with her. They collide. That's how stars are born. She led Elena to the window, pulling back the heavy curtain to reveal the Chicago skyline, a grid of lights stretching out into the dark. It was a map of millions of lives, each one a separate, contained unit. Look at it, Maya said. All those boxes. All those offices. All those structures. You think you're trapped in one, but you're just part of the architecture. You can move between the floors. That sounds like a metaphor, Elena said, though she felt the truth in it. It's an instruction, Maya countered. She turned to face her, her hands finding the small of Elena's back, pulling her into the space where the city lights hit their faces. I don't need you to be an artist. I don't need you to burn your life down. I just want you to be the person who comes through that door, even when the rain isn't falling. I want you to be the person who isn't afraid of the mess. I'm not afraid, Elena said. And she realized, with a shock, that it was true. The fear had evaporated, replaced by a curiosity that felt like a hunger. Good, Maya said, her voice dropping to a low, intimate register. Because I'm not done with you yet. The evening stretched on, not into a rush of activity, but into a series of small, significant moments. They opened the second bottle of wine. They sat on the floor, surrounded by canvases, and talked, not about the law or the art, but about the things that made them who they were. Elena spoke of the pressure of her career, the expectations of her family, the loneliness of success. Maya spoke of the need to create, the struggle to be understood, the way she used color to express the things words couldn't hold. It was a stripping away of masks, a rare, honest communion that Elena hadn't experienced in years. As the night deepened, the studio grew cold, but the distance between them had narrowed to almost nothing. When Elena finally decided it was time to leave, the transition felt jarring. She gathered her blazer, the fabric crisp and familiar, but as she put it on, she felt like she was wearing a costume. Maya walked her to the door. She didn't try to stop her. She stood in the frame, her presence a steady, magnetic pull. Same time next week? Elena asked, her hand on the brass knob. Same time whenever you need to remember that you exist outside of that office, Maya replied. Elena stepped out into the hallway. The air was cool and silent. She walked down the stairs, her heartbeat steady, her mind clear. She wasn't carrying the weight of the previous day, nor was she burdened by the anxiety of the morning to come. She stepped out into the street. The city was quiet, the air crisp. She looked up at the stars, obscured by the city lights but still there, a constant, silent presence. She wasn't going home to sleep. She was going home to think, to process, and to prepare. She reached her car, unlocked the door, and sat in the driver's seat. She didn't look at her phone, which was flooded with emails and missed calls. She didn't look at her calendar. She looked at her hands. The paint was gone, but the memory of the touch remained. A smudge of blue, a trace of yellow, a ghost of something new. She started the engine, the sound a low, steady rumble in the night. She pulled away from the curb, moving into the flow of the city. She was going back to the firm, back to the law, back to the structure. But as she drove, she knew the structure was different. It had a window now. And through it, she could see the sky. The annual Sterling Vance Charity Gala was a study in controlled elegance. The venue, a cavernous, glass-walled gallery overlooking the Chicago River, was filled with the rhythmic clink of champagne flutes and the hum of polite, expensive laughter. For Elena, this was usually home turf. She knew the players, the protocol, and the exact degree of smile required to navigate the room without triggering a rumor or losing a client. But tonight, the room felt like a stage set. The paintings on the walls, curated, polished, and safe, looked like stagnant water compared to the vivid, messy energy of Maya's studio. Elena navigated the crowd, her hand resting lightly on the waist of her midnight blue silk dress. She was the picture of corporate grace, yet every movement felt performative. She was waiting for a variable she knew would shatter the static composition of the evening. "You look like you're interrogating the hors d'oeuvres," a voice murmured beside her. Elena didn't need to turn to know it was Maya. The scent of her, cedar and something sharp, like rain on hot asphalt, cut through the suffocating perfume of the gala. Elena turned. Maya was a jarring note in the symphony of tuxedos and gowns. She wore a tailored suit, but the jacket was slightly oversized, the cuffs rolled back, and her dark hair was pinned up with a casual, almost defiant carelessness. She looked like a rebellion dressed for dinner. "I'm calculating the cost-benefit analysis of being here," Elena replied, her voice low. She took a sip of her champagne, her eyes tracking the way Maya's gaze swept the room. "And you? You're a long way from your easel." "I'm the artist for this exhibit," Maya said, gesturing toward a large, abstract piece on the far wall, a riot of gold and indigo that looked suspiciously like the one they had touched together. "I'm obligated to stand here and pretend I don't despise the term visionary." Elena glanced at the painting, then back at Maya. The recognition passed between them, a silent acknowledgement of the secret they shared. The canvas was vibrant, alive, and entirely out of place among the muted, corporate-friendly landscapes surrounding it. "It's beautiful," Elena said, and she meant it. She saw not just the pigment, but the chaos that had created it. "It's honest," Maya corrected. She leaned in closer, invading Elena's personal space. The gala was crowded, but in the small circle of their proximity, the rest of the world felt distant. You look tired, Elena. The suit is a little too tight, isn't it? It's professional attire, Elena countered, though she felt the truth of the observation. The fabric felt restrictive, a physical manifestation of the expectations she was carrying. It serves a purpose. And what's the purpose tonight? To impress people you don't like, or to avoid being seen as someone who might actually feel something? The question was sharp, a scalpel under the skin. Elena stiffened, but she didn't step away. She realized that she had been holding her breath since she arrived, waiting for this specific kind of friction. I'm here to maintain the structure of my life. That is not a crime. No, Maya agreed, her tone softening. But it is a performance. You're playing a character. I want to know when the show ends. A group of partners from the firm began to drift in their direction. Elena saw the shift in the social currents, the way the room arranged itself around the hierarchy of power. She had seconds before she was pulled into the orbit of work. I can't leave, Elena whispered, a plea buried in a statement of fact. Maya reached out, her fingers brushing against Elena's bare forearm. It was a brief, public touch, but it sent a shockwave through Elena's senses. I'm not asking you to leave. I'm asking you to look at me, not them. Maya turned, her back to the crowd, creating a small, private pocket of space. After this, she said, her voice a low, steady command. The catering service will start breaking down the bar at 11. Meet me by the service elevator in the loading dock. There's a view of the river that isn't curated for the donors. Elena felt her heart skip a beat, a dangerous, exhilarating rhythm. That's reckless. That's life, Maya replied. Before Elena could answer, the partners arrived, their smiles wide and predatory. Elena. We were just discussing the Henderson merger. Excellent work on the brief. Elena turned, the transition instantaneous. Her voice was smooth, cool, and perfectly modulated. Thank you, David. I'm glad you're pleased with the progress. She played her part. She nodded, she agreed, she sipped her drink, and she offered the professional insights that had built her reputation. But beneath the veneer of conversation, her mind was fixated on the image of the loading dock. She was watching the clock. She was mapping the exit. The evening dragged on, a slow procession of handshakes and hollow exchanges. Every minute felt like a violation of the time she wanted to spend elsewhere. She found herself glancing at Maya across the room, watching her talk to donors with a disarming, chaotic charm. Maya didn't play the part. She was blunt, funny, and entirely herself, and for some reason, the donors loved her for it. At 10:55 p.m., Elena excused herself. She didn't wait for a response. She walked through the crowd with the focused intent of a woman who had finally decided where her true loyalties lay. The service hallway was quiet, smelling of floor wax and industrial disinfectant. The contrast to the gala was stark. She found the loading dock doors, pushed them open, and stepped out onto the concrete platform. The air was cool, biting against her skin. The Chicago River stretched out before her, a ribbon of dark, reflected light. Maya was leaning against the railing, smoking a cigarette, the embers glowing in the dark. She turned as Elena approached, a faint smile on her lips. She didn't say anything, just watched Elena walk toward her. Elena stopped at the railing, the wind catching her hair. She felt a profound sense of relief, the kind that comes from finally letting go of a heavy weight. "You came," Maya said, exhaling a plume of smoke. "I came," Elena repeated. Maya dropped the cigarette and crushed it under her heel. She walked over to Elena, the space between them closing with a familiar, magnetic inevitability. She didn't touch her, not yet. She just stood there, her eyes searching Elena's. "You played the part well," Maya observed. "The lawyer. The shark." "It's what I do," Elena said. "It's what you did," Maya corrected. She reached out, her hand finding the back of Elena's neck, the touch cool and grounding. "Tonight, you were just a person standing in a room, waiting for the only thing that mattered." Elena felt the tears prickle at her eyes, not from sadness, but from a sudden, overwhelming sense of being seen. It was terrifying, and it was the most beautiful thing she had ever known. "I'm exhausted," Elena whispered. "I know," Maya said. She pulled Elena closer, her forehead resting against hers. "So stop fighting. Just breathe." The city roared in the distance, the trains and the cars and the life of Chicago moving on without them. But here, on the edge of the world, it was just the two of them. "I don't know who I am when I'm not playing the part," Elena admitted, the words spilling out like a confession. "Then we'll figure it out," Maya promised. She leaned in, and this time, the kiss was not a collision. It was a promise. It was soft, lingering, and filled with the quiet understanding that they were entering a new, unmapped territory. When they pulled apart, Elena didn't want to go back to the gala. She didn't want to go back to the office. She wanted to stay here, in the dark, with the artist who had dismantled her life and was now helping her rebuild it, one messy, beautiful piece at a time. "I have to go back in," Elena said, though she didn't move. "I know," Maya said. She stepped back, a teasing light in her eyes. "Go on, counselor. Make your exit. But keep your phone on." Elena turned, her heart light, her resolve solid. She walked back toward the door, but she stopped with her hand on the metal handle. She looked back at Maya, a silhouette against the city, a flicker of light in the dark. "I'm not keeping it on for the firm," Elena said. She pushed the door open, leaving the dark behind and stepping back into the light. She didn't look back again. She walked into the gala, her head high, her smile real, and for the first time, she wasn't just surviving the night. She was living it. The silence of Elena's apartment on a Saturday morning was, for the first time in her professional life, not a luxury but an indictment. Usually, the quiet was a canvas upon which she could map out her weekend, briefs to review, calls to return, future strategies to construct. Today, however, the silence felt empty. It lacked the vibrating hum of a potential crisis or the rhythmic pulse of a deadline. She stood in her kitchen, watching the light filter through the floor-to-ceiling windows. The city below was waking up, a grid of organized movement, and she was, for the first time in a decade, outside of the loop. Her phone vibrated on the marble island. "The studio is open. No ties, no blazers, no deadlines. Come exist with me." The text was from Maya. It was simple, almost dismissive, but it carried the weight of an ultimatum. Elena looked at the work folder she had brought home, the Henderson merger, the liability waivers, the mountain of paper that usually provided her with a sense of security. It looked like ancient history. She left the folder on the counter. She pulled on a pair of soft, worn-in jeans and a sweater that she usually reserved for the rare, secret weekends she spent avoiding the world. She didn't look in the mirror to check if she looked professional, She didn't check her watch. She left. The drive to Maya's studio was the most honest thing she had done all week. She didn't take the highway, she took the side streets, watching the city shift from the polished glass of the financial district to the weathered brick of the creative quarter. It was as if she were peeling back layers of the city, moving closer to the core of where things were actually being made. When she reached the alley, the red door was already propped open. Maya was sitting on the floor in the center of the studio, surrounded by a sprawl of fabric swatches and half-empty jars of pigment. She looked up as Elena entered, her eyes sweeping over the casual clothes, lingering on the lack of structure. "You didn't bring the briefcase," Maya observed, not moving from her spot. "I decided it was heavy," Elena replied, stepping inside and letting the door click shut. The smell of the studio, turpentine, coffee, and old wood, immediately settled into her clothes. It was a familiar scent now, an anchor. "Good," Maya said, gesturing to the floor beside her. "Sit. The light is perfect today. We're going to do something that has absolutely no commercial value." Elena Saturday. The floor was dusty, but she didn't care. She watched Maya, who was focused on the fabric. The artist was methodical, cutting, tearing, and pinning the swatches onto a large, wooden frame. There was no hesitation in her movements, no second guessing. "What is this?" Elena asked. "A study in texture," Maya said. She looked at Elena, her gaze sharp. "You've spent your life dealing with the smooth surface of the law. Contracts, agreements, settlements, everything is designed to be frictionless. I want to show you the value of the frayed edge." She handed Elena a pair of fabric scissors and a piece of coarse, raw linen. "Cut it. Not neatly. Just tear it. Let it fray." Elena hesitated. Her hands were trained for precision, for cutting along the lines, for keeping everything within the margins. She looked at the fabric. It was rough, uneven, and stubborn. She gripped the edge and pulled. The sound of the linen ripping was sharp, visceral. It felt like a violation of her nature, and yet, it was the most satisfying thing she had done in months. "Again," Maya commanded, her voice dropping to a low, encouraging rhythm. Elena ripped another piece. Then another. She tore the fabric until her hands were tired and the floor was littered with threads and scraps. She was creating a mess, and for the first time, she wasn't looking for a way to clean it up. "You look different," Maya said after a long silence. She had stopped working and was simply watching Elena. "Different how?" "You aren't trying to solve the fabric," Maya said, a soft smile playing on her lips. "You're just feeling it. You're finally present." Elena leaned back, resting her hands on the floorboards. She looked at the heap of fabric, the disarray of the studio, and then at Maya, who was bathed in the late morning sun. She realized that the tension she had been carrying, the constant, low-level hum of anxiety, was gone. "I think I'm losing my edge," Elena mused. "No," Maya countered. "You're just trading a sharp edge for a soft one. There's a difference. Sharpness is just a defense mechanism. Softness, that's where the truth lives." Maya moved closer, sliding across the floor until there was no space left between them. She reached out, brushing a stray thread from Elena's sweater. Her fingers lingered on the wall, then moved to the pulse point at Elena's throat. The touch was light, but it was electric. "You're a terrifying woman, Maya," Elena whispered. "And you're a liberated one," Maya replied. "You just don't know it yet." The air in the studio changed. The playful, competitive banter faded, replaced by an intimacy that felt almost overwhelming. Elena realized that she didn't want to leave this space. She didn't want to go back to the office, to the boardrooms, to the world where she was defined by her utility. "I don't want to be a lawyer today," Elena said, the words heavy and honest. "Then be a human," Maya said. "Be the person who sits on the floor and tears linen and drinks bad coffee and watches the light change. That's enough." It was a radical statement, the idea that she could just be. For a woman who had measured her life in billable hours and achievements, it was a terrifying, beautiful concept. Maya reached for the jar of coffee on the table, pouring 2 mugs of the lukewarm, dark liquid. She handed one to Elena, and they sat in silence, drinking, watching the dust motes dance in the light. "Do you think it's possible?" Elena asked, tracing the rim of the mug. "To live like this? To balance the 2 worlds?" "I think," Maya said, leaning against the wall, "that you're asking the wrong question. It's not about balance. It's about integration. You have to bring your truth into your work, or you have to leave your work behind. You can't keep hiding in the middle." Elena looked at the fabric scraps, the beautiful, messy result of her morning's work. She realized that the Henderson merger, the brief, the partners, the expectations, could be handled. She could do the work without letting it define her. She could be the shark in the boardroom and the woman on the studio floor. She could have both. "I think I'm afraid of what happens if I stop fighting," Elena admitted. "You aren't fighting the world, Elena," Maya said, moving to sit behind her, wrapping her arms around her waist, pulling her back against her chest. The heat of her body was a comfort, a shield against the doubts in Elena's mind. "You're fighting yourself. Stop. You're allowed to be more than one thing." Elena closed her eyes. The scent of Maya, paint, coffee, and something uniquely, undeniably hers, filled her senses. She felt safe here. She felt seen. "I want to stay," Elena whispered. "Then stay," Maya murmured, her lips brushing against the shell of Elena's ear. "The city will be there on Monday. For now, there's only this." They spent the rest of the day in the studio, not talking about the law, not talking about the gala, not talking about the future. They listened to jazz, they drank wine, and they worked on the fabric installation. It was a slow, deliberate process, a collaboration of textures and colors that had no goal other than to exist. As the sun began to set, casting a deep, golden glow across the studio, Elena watched the way the light hit Maya's face. She looked at the woman who had, in the span of a few short weeks, dismantled her carefully constructed life and replaced it with something far more volatile and far more rewarding. She reached out, taking Maya's hand. Her own hands were stained with pigment again, her hair was disheveled, and her sweater was covered in lint. She looked like a mess. She felt like a masterpiece. "I think I'm finally understanding," Elena said, her voice soft in the quiet room. "Understanding what?" Maya asked, pulling her closer. "That the most important case I've ever taken," Elena said, looking into Maya's dark, knowing eyes, "is the one I'm currently building with you." Maya laughed, a warm, resonant sound that filled the studio. "Good. Because I have a feeling it's going to be a long trial." "I hope so," Elena replied. She didn't reach for her phone. She didn't check the time. She simply leaned into the touch, into the light, into the person who had taught her that the most beautiful things in life aren't found in a contract, but in the spaces between them. The Saturday evening descended, the city outside began to blur into a constellation of lights, But in the studio, everything was clear. Everything was beginning. And for